Several months ago, Conrad and I went back to Rotan to clean out his parents' house so it could be sold. His dad lives with us in Dallas now, so the house has been empty for a while, except for the collected mementos and memories of 3/4 of a century. Plenty of things there for us to observe, sort through, and make decisions about. I went through the kitchen cabinets, collecting various bowls, serving dishes, and tea towels we might be able to make use of. One can never have too many tea towels. As I looked into his dad's closet, I decided to grab his ties, which, being retired, he'll never wear again. I was hoping to find a few that I could wear on Sunday mornings. Once I got home, I remembered that my aunt had taken my grandmother's old clothes and sewn them together to make lap quilts for the granddaughters. So I began reimagining what I might do with the ties. I called my dad, who's also retired, and had him send me his old ties as well, which he'll never wear again. I shipped all the ties to my friend in Kentucky, who fashioned this stole for me to wear on Father's Day. That wasn't meant as an applause line, and both services, the stole got applause. So I saw the ties, thought about them, and my friend and I reimagined what we could do with them, and she acted to create something new. After observing things, we as thoughtful people contemplate in order to reimagine. As Parker Palmer told us in our second reading, our drive to aliveness expresses itself in two elemental and inseparable ways: action and contemplation. And then he told us one cannot exist without the other. If the paradox is not held together, then both ends fly apart into madness. The popular spirituality author and Franciscan priest Richard Rohr even named his organization the Center for Action and Contemplation. Now, this may remind some of you of a process you are familiar with, but I didn't learn about until seminary, because the process not only has a theological or spiritual meaning, it's also used in political, educational, and medical arenas. And I know what a well-rounded bunch you are. So I kept coming across the word praxis in my readings in seminary, Praxis. And when I looked up the word, the definitions I found really didn't seem to get to the gist of what my sense of what the authors I was reading were getting at. Misters Merriam and Webster said it was the action or practice, such as the exercise or practice of an art, science, or skill. So I asked my theology professor, and he wrote on the whiteboard, practice, do, on one line, and then just below that, theory, think. And then he drew curved, double-headed arrows pointing toward each end of the lines, indicating a circle. He then described the circular or spiraling interplay between contemplation and action implied in the term praxis. So we observe something or a situation, think about it, then take action. The action has a result, or not. Then we observe what happened, think about it, and take action again. So it occurred to me, we have these two observances today, Father's Day and Juneteenth. Once we have observed and contemplated what we were commemorating, what action might we consider taking? Well, let's look at them. First, Juneteenth. April 28th, 1607, off the east coast of North America. Early Jamestown settlers aboard the ship the Susan Constant anchored off the coast of what would become colonial Virginia. According to legend, crew members rowed to a point where they found a channel which put them in good comfort. And so they named the adjacent lands Cape Comfort. only 12 years later, in August of 1619, the ship the White Lion, carrying the first documented African slaves, docked at Point Comfort. June 19th, 1865, 246 years later, on the Gulf Coast, Union Major General Gordon Granger and his men marched throughout Galveston, reading General Order Number 3. The order read, in part, "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former slaves and masters, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor." The Jamestown settlers may have found comfort on the East Coast in 1607, but it took the enslaved another 246 years in a trek of over 1,400 miles to the Gulf Coast to begin to find some semblance and reimagination of comfort. Since that day, the emancipation of enslaved African Americans and the celebration of African American culture have been observed annually in various parts of the country as Juneteenth. Father's Day, just after 1900 in Spokane, Washington. Sonora Smart Dodd, at a church service at the Central Methodist Episcopal Church, heard a sermon about the newly recognized Mother's Day. When Sonora was 16, her mother died in childbirth with her 6th child. Sonora was the only daughter, and with her father William, raised her younger brothers. Consequently, she held her father in great esteem. After hearing about Mother's Day, she approached the Spokane Ministerial Alliance to suggest a recognition for fathers. The Alliance chose the 3rd Sunday in June, and the first Father's Day was celebrated June 19th, 1910 in Spokane. It became popular, and the observance spread across the nation, but it wasn't until 1972 that it was established as a permanent national observance by President Nixon. So I began thinking, how does this acknowledgement of fatherhood lend itself to reimagining, let alone to some synthesis of comfort in Father's Day? What aspects should we hold up to contemplation and to action? As I thought, it occurred to me, I believe fatherhood itself has been reimagined. Being a dad has evolved a lot just during my lifetime. This has been reflected on television by going from Father Knows Best to Modern Family. From a stereotypical middle-class family with a wise working dad and stay-at-home mom to 3 diverse families, a nuclear family, a blended family, and a same-sex family. The economics of financing a family has radically changed during that time as well. Without a college degree and on only his income, my dad was able to buy a modest house. Mom was able to stay at home, and they were able to afford to raise 3 kids. But in the early 70s, a disconnect between productivity and typical workers' compensation began. Despite productivity's continuing to increase, workers' paychecks stagnated, and it became more and more necessary for both parents to work outside the home. About the same time, the laws addressing both parents and single women working and women's rights were also evolving in Texas. A Dallas attorney, Louise Raggio, was the first female prosecutor in Dallas County and member of First Unitarian in Dallas. In 1967, Raggio led a revision to the state's laws. The Marital Property Act was a comprehensive set of statutes which, though aimed specifically at families, amended the laws regarding virtually every aspect of life in Texas, including insurance, banking, real estate, deeds, contracts, divorce, choice of domicile, child custody, and property rights. This revision of the state's laws amounted to a virtual revolution for women in Texas. Its major and still largely unappreciated effect was to give married women equal legal rights. This expanding of options for women necessitated a reimagining of options and responsibilities for men. Men no longer had to assume they were expected to marry, be the sole breadwinner, and the source of wisdom for the family, like Robert Young in Father Knows Best. From that time, and from what I see, dads want to be more involved in the hands-on raising of their kids. People began reimagining parenting, including doing it as a single parent, whether out of choice or necessity. The gaining of rights of the LGBTQ community has opened options for us. Both of Conrad's kids lived with us as teenagers, something I hadn't anticipated. One of my favorite out and proud talents, Neil Patrick Harris, said, "I always thought I'd make a good parent, but I was single and led a solitary life for many, many years. Then I met David, and he had experience with kids and wanted to have a family too." Of course, not everyone is thrilled with this progress. Many think the Father Knows Best model with a stay-at-home mom is not only preferred but ordained by God. Some of you no doubt remember Vice President Dan Quayle calling out Murphy Brown for choosing to become a single mom. And there are no shortage of politicians who believe toddlers would do better in an orphanage than with two parents of the same gender. I know someone who was told that to his face. My action after contemplating Father's Day is not only to speak truth to and vote against those imposing their narrow, unaccepting views onto other people's families. It is also to address the lack of a living wage for workers. If a parent could raise their family on one salary, the other parents, and yes, that could be the dad, or one of the dads, could stay at home if they chose. A single parent or parents who work could afford quality child care. According to one study, child care expenses amount to 35% of low-income families' earnings. I would suggest if those who claim to be pro-family really were, they would be advocating for raising the minimum wage to a living wage. The minimum wage has been $7.25 since 2009. By the way, a Big Mac is $5.99. A Big Mac meal is $5.99, meaning a minimum wage worker has to work 50 minutes to buy lunch. The livable wage in Texas in 2022 is estimated at $17.62, over $10 an hour more than it currently stands. If we are to continue to successfully reimagine fatherhood, we need to get people being paid a living wage so parents can afford to imagine and share parenting as they choose. We are also commemorating Juneteenth today, and I gave a brief description of the history of this holiday earlier. I don't remember even hearing about this celebration when I was growing up. Kentucky is closer to Cape Comfort than to Galveston. Many holidays like Father's Day and the 4th of July are celebrated across the country, of course, but some have more regional roots than others. In Kentucky, we observe Derby Day, and those in Louisville actually observe Derby Week, a bit like those in New Orleans observe Mardi Gras. When I got to Texas, I learned about Whataburger, Buc-ee's, and Juneteenth. Since the 1980s and 90s, the holiday has been more widely celebrated among African American communities and has been seen increasingly mainstream attention in the U.S. Just last year, President Biden made it a federal holiday. Of course, just like those against a more vulnerable, involved type of father, there are those against judging people predominantly on the color of their skin. I fear that those who hope we return to the days of Father Knows Best may may even be fewer than those who would see us return to the days of Jim Crow or the Confederacy. Because over the past several years, white supremacy has come out from hiding and taken residence from Main Street to the Oval Office. There's apparently no need to wear a sheet if people in high elected office share your views. The Southern Poverty Law Center published more than 900 emails Donald Trump's senior advisor for policy and chief speechwriter, Stephen Miller, wrote to his contacts at Breitbart News before the 2016 election. According to AmericanProgress.org, in the emails, Miller, an advisor to the Trump campaign at the time, advocated many of the most extreme white supremacist concepts. These included the Great Replacement theory, fears of white genocide through immigration, race science, and eugenics. He also linked immigrants with crime, glorified the Confederacy, and promoted the genocidal book, The Camp of the Saints, as a roadmap for U.S. policy. Anti-Semitism was the only missing white nationalist trope in the emails, perhaps unsurprisingly, as Miller himself is Jewish. The same Southern Poverty Law Center reported that white nationalist hate groups in the U.S. increased 55% during the Trump era. Our first UU principle guides us to acknowledge the inherent worth and dignity of every person. So I don't think our action items in this respect are too difficult to figure out. The political activist, philosopher, and scholar Angela Davis said, "In a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist." A while back, the church staff read the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, by Ibram X. Kendi. We read a chapter a week and discussed them at the staff meetings. This author of 5 straight #1 New York Times bestsellers is slated to be the guest speaker at the Ware Lecture at General Assembly on Saturday. In the announcement, it was written, "His relentless and passionate research puts into question the notion of a post-racial society and opens readers' and audiences' eyes to the reality of racism in America today." If you're registered for GA, you can watch the Ware Lecture live stream, or, of course, in person if you're there in Portland, or you can pick up his book if you haven't already. It won't be until next year and the year after that the vote on the 8th principle will take place at GA. You're probably familiar with the 7 principles. If not, they're on our website or in the gray hymnal right in front of you. Next year at this church, we will discuss our congregation embracing the proposed 8th principle. It reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote, journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." When I began writing this sermon, I knew that each of the holidays we are celebrating today could suggest things for us to take action on. I think part of my job is giving you ideas on how to move us toward beloved community. I didn't realize until later on that the need for the actions might stem from the same thing: the resurgence of our fellow citizens fighting against those things. There are those who would not only stop our progress toward an anti-racist world, but are against one where parents have options that spring from their abilities and choices, not their gender or financial constraints. They would have us go back to a world that works best for only straight, white, cisgender males, not for everyone. But we as UUs want a world that respects the inherent worth and dignity of every person. But we need to keep working on it. We will observe the situation to not only contemplate, but to give gratitude for our blessings. We will take action to not only make things better, but to see who is being ignored and oppressed by the present situation, and will act. We will assess the results of our actions and observe again in order to contemplate. Then we'll take action again until we and the world get it right. Amen.